Welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about currently much discussed and debated topic, Chat GPT and generative AI. And we have today Professor Arpan Kar from Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, and my colleague, Dr. Laurie Hughes and Dr. Tagwin Malik. So we're just going to have a simple conversation what generative AI is and what kind of implication it will bring to all of us, actually, and to all different activities, for example, teaching, learning, research, and many other aspects. Professor Arpan Kar is one who is actually specialized to various aspects of artificial intelligence. He's been teaching and publishing AI-related aspects since last 15 years and have published several highly cited papers on this particular topic. In fact, he has also contributed to the paper that we recently published on ChatGPT and its implication in International Journal of Information Management. So Professor Arpan Kar going to bring a different perspective from his research here for all of us. So Arpan, with this, I pass on to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this cordial invitation, Yogesh. And it's really great to have this interaction. So yeah, I've been working in the space of, AI when I started with my PhD. And actually before that, when we used to call it less of AI, because during my graduation days or undergraduation days, in those days, I also used to work with computer vision, which is typically called as computer vision now, but we used to call it image mining in those days. So my, when I was in the age of early 20s, so I started looking at how images can be compressed, how to determine, and I, bring out information out of images. So that start with AI started around more than 15 years actually, in those days. So if you look at AI, like AI is a pretty old concept, which was introduced when Alan Turing in 1950s proposed a test that whether a machine could be perceived to be as intelligent enough to generate a response to queries that an individual makes in a way that is very similar to that of a human being. So in the 1950s, when this concept came, in those days, there was no algorithm which would be typically considered as AI, but very soon, algorithms like neural networks started developing, if you look in the 1960s and 70s. But then, in those days, it was more of a mathematical function. Nobody would really tie that neural networks with, artificial intelligence. And there was a stage when, in the 1980s and 1990s, when artificial intelligence as a term, as a concept, was almost a stigma. To people who are working in the space, there was a time that it was also a stigma, but due to different reasons. But then, if you look at 1970s, researchers started creating more and more advanced models, more and more realistic and coherent models, which can be implemented using algorithmic code. So there was actual implementation of the maths, which was, the precursor for artificial intelligence. So now if you look at how things develop, today, if you look at how artificial intelligence borrows its themes from machine learning, it has, generated systematic capabilities to reason out based on the inputs and learning and produce outcomes so that it can adapt to changes in the ecosystem. It can provide outputs based on the interaction that it has with the user. So in this context, if you look at it, machine learning is one of the most predominant driver. So if you look at machine learning in the classic sense, machine learning started with, supervised and unsupervised learning. So if you look at supervised learning models, which were mainly like classification-based algorithms, and unsupervised learning models, which were like clustering-based algorithms, which were like k-means, which were typically going to find a structure in data that is not being labeled. And then if you look at supervised learning, there were classification algorithms, which were like, decision trees, neural networks, which will try to have a labeling done. And then it would find out structures. It would try to predict and map a particular query or a particular data set to an existing structure. That was the first stage. And then we had semi-supervised learning coming in, which was an in-between thing between supervised and unsupervised. But from there, newer models of learning came in. Newer models as in we started talking about areas like reinforcement learning coming in. And reinforcement learning was when we don't need to have a dump of data to initially enable the model to learn. In case of supervised or unsupervised learning, we basically need the data first to infer rules. But in case of reinforcement learning, we would have positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement based on whether the classification or whether the mapping was accurate, appropriate or not. And then the model starts inferring rules, based on, different kinds of functions. So like for some of our papers, we have used Q-learning as a model for function, but it starts, developing inferences and rules based on different functions. Now, in this context, what has happened is there are many new learning models which have also come out, which are more related to federated learning. Like when we talk of distributed, IoT sensors, which might be there, and these devices might not have very huge compute. There might be tiny ML, which may be able to take decisions based on limited data that is generated at the sensor, which might be dispersed. So many new algorithm types and learning types came up. In this context, what evolved was that suddenly this, learning, which is based on labeling of the data set or supervised learning, that started moving into the space of deep learning. So if you look at the space of deep learning, what started happening is that in the space of deep learning, we started looking at computer vision, and in computer vision, areas like, recurrent neural network, areas like convoluted neural network came in. So convoluted neural network is mostly for images, and recurrent neural network is mostly for, when you talk of audio, if you're going to mine audio, if you're going to mine videos, then these are more useful. So in this context, what started evolving in deep learning is something that we call as a architecture that is based on transformers. So when we talk of models like LSTM coming in, BERT models coming in, these are basically language-based models, and the current GAI that we are hyping, we are so much talking about, is based on transformer-based architecture. But language models, if you look at the essence of language models, they basically date back to late 1990s. So in those days, we used to call them as, there might be unigram, bigram, trigram, which is basically the preceder for what we typically call as topic modeling, latent Dirichlet allocation. They were basically the predecessor. So you would try to have similar summarization of a text volume into 2 words, 3 words, which will, try to convey the essence of that text, of a larger volume of text. So from there, the language model started developing, where models like LSTM started becoming better and better in terms of predicting and summarizing a large volume of text. So as an extension of LSTM, which would be used for language modeling, this transformer-based architecture came in, and slowly, these transformer-based architecture based on the size of the database, the size of the corpus which was used to train the model, we started seeing, newer models like GPT-4, GPT-3 kind of architecture. And that is where, when it basically hit the market, that ChatGPT became so popular. We started looking at, different types of, architecture, which will be very useful for, predicting, responding to human beings, responding to queries in such a way that it generates the content directly. It is not responding in a very selective structured way, it can generate unstructured answer responses to queries. And that is where ChatGPT, which was, based on transformer architecture, came in. BERT was also something very similar based on NLP, or natural language processing, which was bidirectional encoder representation from transformer, which came in. Then you had the OpenAI iteration on DALI or DALI 2, which came in, and these are all different products. Then there was Stable Diffusion, Lumen, SoundRaw. Many of these were basically based on the large language models. So in, like, for example, in IGIM Data Insights, few days back, we had little bit of discussion and a publication which was on language models. And now when generative AI became so popular, it's not that large language models have not been there, but the principles of large language models date back to, late 1990s and early 2000. There was a lot of work which were surrounding these language models. But now, with the capability that large language models can be trained with much larger data set, it will have some amounts of memory. Even now, there are lots of problems in terms of the memory element. Like, for example, if you have a discussion with ChatGPT today, the discussion that you have with ChatGPT today, after 3-4 days, if you again revisit the same discussion, it will not remember whatever discussion it had with you today. So at this moment, it might respond and say that I have adjusted my data sets using your inputs, but later on, that memory is basically having a short duration. So that memory is not really there. But these are the areas in which we have seen the evolution of generative AI coming in a huge way. So there is always this debate that to what extent generative AI is going to evolve. So this is one area that generative AI needs to evolve in the future if we can have greater mechanisms of remembering and memory for these models. So what happens in this context is there is something called exploding gradient and vanishing gradient for many of these deep learning models. And that is typically the reason why some of the models started using, like, for example, LSTM came out as a model for, shortening and reducing the value of content into content summarization in many of these language models as an initial phase. So that's how we started this journey of, generative AI. So we are still at the text, most of it, but this is where it gets more and more useful, because a lot of generative AI is now started being used in images also, and slowly it will diffuse into videos. So images, like if I have somebody who I don't want in a frame, I can very easily remove that person from the frame. So that's kind of image generation. So that's where generative AI is moving. So if I remove somebody from the frame and I can change the background of myself very easily, then that creates a lot more challenges over time. That do I trust the person? Do I trust the image? How do I ensure that what we are getting is not generated content, but is actually real content? So that's where a lot more deliberation is going on.
Thank you, Atman. That's very interesting. Obviously, you see the map from the beginning of AI, then large language model, generative AI, and more specific to GPT and other things. You mentioned quite a few of them already there. So, Lani, would you like to initiate your discussion?
Yes, thank you very much, Yogesh. And thank you, Arpan. That was very insightful. It's great to hear your views on how generative AI has evolved over time. I'm interested in sort of looking forward for a second, and just thinking about some of the views in the literature, but also in the practitioner-based articles on where we're heading from a societal perspective, I suppose, through the greater adoption of AI. If you think back to perhaps someone like Nick Bostrom's view on the dystopian perspective from AI, and versus perhaps other people who are a bit more optimistic about how we can use generative AI as a tool. How do you see things progressing in the sort of short to medium term? And how do you think the impact will be felt across different industries, the implications, as I say, at a societal level?
Okay. So if I look at like how, so first I'll try to take the perspective of organizations which are pro generative AI. So I'll share a context. There is a I'll not name the manufacturer, but there is a major laptop manufacturer who started implementing, generative AI or GPT framework in terms of in their internal system, so that people can, when they have queries, they can have the business rules onboarded on the platform. And then whenever they have queries, they can just query the platform and then get the responses, which is customized, contextualized based on the rules of the business of that organization. But the moment they put all the knowledge, all the data of the organization in the generative AI, unfortunately, what happened was the same information was available publicly for the other generative AI models, which was available on the web. So GPT-4, which was running exclusively for their organization, GPT-4 across globally learned those business rules. So that became something little disruptive, because when the organization, which is of course a very tech-savvy organization, did not foresee that the loading of the data, the loading of the information on an architecture like this, the architecture has shared rules. The way that the architecture learns is basically from each other. So there is no mechanism in which you can restrict the learning of the architecture within the context that you are trying to bring out the system. So the information basically moved beyond the organization for a lot of other applications, a lot of other implementation. So that was one of the ways that that was one of the challenges. Like if you talk of today organizations which are very pro towards, implementing large language models for their businesses, they also need to be very careful about these cases, because sometimes there are unintended consequences of adopting a technology without really knowing how the technology will respond in that ecosystem, whether there is some fallout that we had not really foreseen. Many things we foresee that, okay, if we use this technology, there is going to be huge efficiencies among the employees inside. So you need probably lesser number of people who could be, working on this space, lesser number of people who could be doing the activity that you have now. So that is something that is going to evolve. Now, recently, if you look at ever since language models came in, there is a lot more jobs surrounding a new phenomenon. And for this, like some projects we have started deliberating on, which is surrounding prompt engineering. So prompt engineering is something that has come out, that you have a person who would be very good in using the generative AI models. So suppose you don't need a person to really code that much. You can have a person who just asks the right question, and he should be, better tuned to ask the right question, and the model itself responds in terms of the correct answers. So what would likely to happen is, when a prompt engineer can potentially do the work of 10 people or 15 people in the team and demonstrate diverse capabilities, because he does not need to have a skill set of developing a code, but if he can ask the right question, the code is generated. So that would have a lot more implications of the future of jobs debate that World Economic Forum has been deliberating. And in recent times, that has become pretty important, because now with generative AI, a lot more work which would have need ideally, especially for a country like India, where there is a huge amount of IT jobs, IT-enabled services, there is a chance that IT-enabled services, IT jobs which are there are going to take a hit, because organizations can implement these codes, this generative AI, and move from which used to be a low-code environment to a more no-code environment. And that is one of the areas that research is following towards. So I think those are areas that that is going to be also a concern for people who are pro towards using IT, pro towards using new, generative AI. And then, we will start thinking of whether it is going to be augmenting, productivity. Yes, it can augment productivity for some, but there might be others who might not be having the skill set to augment their productivity using these tools. So for augmenting productivity, we basically need people like prompt engineers. They are supposed to be very innovative in their ways of approaching their jobs. So they have to innovate in terms of how they try to solve a problem and automate the problem to a large extent. So if there are people who are able to think out of the box, there are people who are able to, innovate very fast. It is the innovators who are going to be ahead of the curve, and they are going to benefit by using platforms like these.
So
for people who are...
Can I ask you, just related to it, before you further, prompt engineer has to be domain expert as well, isn't it? Unless they are domain expert, so they might create prompt, they might get answers, but unless they really know what the answers should be, more ideally, it can generate anything and they have to believe it. So the prompt engineer, when we say, I would say that they are the domain expert, but trained for using ChatGPT. Yeah.
Yes, I completely agree. So what is changing is, like, you had typically thought that engineers would be coders. Now, prompt engineers who are coming in, they would be very vertical aligned. So if you look at how prompt engineers, like in US, you see a lot more advertisements of jobs surrounding prompt engineers who are getting $250,000 to $300,000. So these are people who are going to have a very good understanding about the vertical or the function that they are trying to join. So if it is something for financial services, they have to understand the business rules of the financial services, how workflows in the financial services typically are. And so that when they are querying any particular, GPT platform or any kind of GAI platform, they should be able to understand what is getting returned from the GPT is actually making sense. The other side of it is these generative AI models need to be vertically aligned. As of now, these are general. As of now, if you look at how the generative AI platforms which we are getting exposed to, they're independent of the vertical. That specific domain-specific knowledge is not there. The discipline-specific knowledge is not there. But they have to be aligned with a vertical. So once they are aligned with a vertical, that will happen when they are adopted in a particular industry. For example, the laptop manufacturing industry tried doing that, but that is one of the adverse outcomes which has not come out much in the news, but in internal circles that has been kind of deliberated. But I completely agree that it has to be completely vertical aligned when we talk of, and that's where the diffusion is going to happen gradually. Some industries would be more open towards it. Some industries will be less open towards it.
So when obviously it would be vertically aligned, at that point, maybe it's easier, their job would be easier because the information will be more specific to that vertical. But in fact, now is the time when they need more specific knowledge about a particular industry and vertical when they're going to use. So along with prompt, they also need to have that specific knowledge, right?
Yes.
So I'll let you carry on with your response that you were giving to Laurie's question.
No,
Yeah,
I think you're more or less there, Arpan, but I just one quick follow-up. Sorry to interrupt you, but do you feel that society will adapt as they have done throughout Industrial Revolution times and other innovative, transformative inventions throughout history? Do you just feel that we will go further up the value chain, for example, jobs will evolve, that it's not going to be, a scenario where we have to look at sort of universal basic income for people to occupy their time? Do you think that we'll just sort of get used to it over time once the dust settles down and will become more productive and more innovative, etc.?
Yeah, I think, we will evolve. We always have evolved. So fundamentally, if you look at industrial revolution, the early industrial revolution, there is always this debate that information systems, will it be a differentiator or whether it will be an infrastructural asset? So if you look at technology, there was time when like steam engines would have been a differentiator. There was a time when electricity would have been a differentiator, but gradually those also became infrastructure for the organizations. So now if you look at technology, the traditional technology like enterprise systems, when this debate started coming in, whether technology or information systems is going to be a differentiator or is it going to be an infrastructure, I think the traditional way that we have been envisioning information systems like enterprise systems, cloud computing, internet, these will become infrastructure for us. If they are there, it's not really a differentiator. If we don't have it, it's going to be a disruption in our day-to-day activities. So in this context, gradually when generative AI diffuses, I think the nature, that the way we define our jobs, the way that we are defining how we interact with people, that's going to fundamentally change. So it might happen that, the regular, like for us, we are in academia, so we may not need a person like us going to the class physically talking with the students. Once our lectures over some sessions are recorded, students can have queries and the generative AI can resolve those queries based on whatever past queries a student has raised. So if we have those recordings, GAI chatbot can potentially respond to any query that a student has raised because, for example, like us, whenever a student raises queries, we respond to the queries in class based on our thinking, and over a period of time, in a particular course, there is saturation that we achieve. So we have saturation in terms of what all potential questions a student can ask. A generative AI is also going to demonstrate those qualities and potentially do away with our regular day-to-day queries or day-to-day teaching. What we will evolve as a profession, I foresee, is how we innovate, how we spend our time, how we try to make students think out of the box. And that is where all other professions are likely to innovate and move towards.
But then, sorry to kind of intervene, but in terms of this resolving queries, right? So it's great. I mean, the course might be the same, but if the structure changes, lecturer changes, then the kind of content also get adapted. In that scenario, of course, the generative AI will give the response based on what is there, but this response may not be what actually the current lecturer may want to give to students, right?
Yes, completely agree. Like ideally for a course, especially for information systems, what I do is every semester I'll have 10-20% addition on my existing course. So 10-20% gets kind of thrown away and there'll be updates to 10-20% of my content. So I think we as faculty members, we would be ending up teaching those 10-20%. And then gradually that diffuses to becoming main part of the course based on queries raised by the students, based on discussions we are having. And then the GAI will also learn those rules, learn those responses. But we have to continue to create those 10-20% new content for a course so that it is updated. So our role would be innovating for understanding what those 10-20% would be over a period of time, instead of focusing on the delivery, I believe, because already we are seeing flipped classrooms and a lot more content. Like I was discussing with few of we had this online teaching for executive education. So I was talking to many of the service providers of the edtech platforms, and many of them feel that it is very difficult to go for, teaching where there is live interaction. They feel that you have the content recorded, you update it frequently, and then based on actual changes, you continue to have interaction with the students when they have necessity for your kind of interaction, which would be mostly for, doubt clearing, which would be mostly for, making changes, making modifications to the course. So when I was talking with many of these companies like Times, Internet, Coursera, Jaro, Simply Learn, many of them said that we don't need content which is interactive, but especially Coursera. They said that we want the content to be recorded and every year you update the content. The part which is little dated, you throw that away, but you introduce a new part every time, every year that you run the program. And I think more and more, a lot more education is going to go towards this, especially for, when we are trying to deal with mature participants, people who are going for higher education. Primary school, of course, there is a more need for empathy. I don't think social bots are going to replace primary education that soon. But when it is more towards professional learning, I think we will adapt to creating innovations, bringing more innovations to class, where research comes to class directly instead of, creating content which will be more basic and delivering that content over and over again.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Arpan. That was fantastic. Tegwin, over to you.
Thank you. Arpan, I was really interested to hear about your ideas around prompts, because I think, you were talking about prompt engineering, and we've been talking about students now as well. I mean, I guess that's probably one of the digital skills of the future as well for our students and staff. But then we've got this issue when it comes to the output of ChatGPT, and it's termed hallucination, where it makes up output. Do you think becoming more skilled in prompts will help overcome that? And do you think, how do you see the future going in terms of ChatGPT, for example, which everyone's talking about, and overcoming this issue of hallucinations with its output in a very logical and convincing way at times, which makes it, even more challenging at times for its users?
So I think this is actually quite a challenging thing that you have brought out. So when I always have this concept in my evaluations for students. I used to say that don't remember anything, don't mug up anything. Bring your laptops to class. You can bring as many books as you want to come for your exams. And I'll make it open book, open laptop exams. But it is this particular semester I have been facing this challenge that when people and students are using this generative AI, they can create responses out of very thought-provoking questions that I'm asking them. So how do I assess who is actually trying to bench press his cognitive skills, in trying to respond to my question, as compared to another person who is just taking the easy way out and using GPT-4 to generate the answers for questions which might be very, very future, oriented, and not really direct answers are never there in the internet, but still it is able to find those answers. So that was one of the realization I had this semester, that when I'm giving open book, probably there are students who are not that great in terms of interpreting and responding to my questions in class, but they're giving fabulous answers. And then there are challenges that, okay, they're just generating the answers. And even for me to evaluate them is becoming a challenge, because I need to go and do a lot more extra reading to verify whether my understanding on that is actually correct or whether it is deviating from reality. So what this generative AI is going to do in the short and long run is going to create immense content. So when that content is getting created, there might be people who might be posting those content in blogs. And this generated content, when it is kept in the blogs, they become reference material for many others, saying that, okay, see, there is this information that I trust. There is this information coming in from different sources. Now, one part of that is when this generative content is posted in personal blogs, then at least there is attribution and you have mechanisms of trusting that source. What I am more apprehensive of is when that generative content can come in news media, and we often have we as individuals trust news media a lot more than what we do for other sources of information. So when this generative AI content, this generative information comes in news media, uh, what if there is a lot more information which is not accurate? There is no proxy for determining the accuracy of the content, because reporters might come in from a different disciplines. They might not be really experts in the discipline that they are generating the content about. For today, they might be generating content on sports. Tomorrow, it might be on financial markets. So tomorrow, when somebody who is writing on financial markets create content which is for even an expert appearing pretty good and pretty, authoritative, what would happen to people who are reading that content and then forming opinions and taking actions based on that recommendations? So I'm apprehensive of that happening, because the research on misinformation, the research on disinformation, both are going to turn into a very different direction. It would be needing to venture into a very different direction with generative AI coming in. Because earlier there were proxies we could, rely on. Proxies could be how we treat the source as a mechanism of trust. Now the source as a mechanism of trust can also become disrupted with GAI coming in, because a lot more media houses are using this. And I think we have to go to some different kinds of theories, some different kinds of checks and balances that search engines need to make when they're recommending content.
Was it, Tegwin, just on that particular point that Arpan made, we discussed yesterday, didn't we, the watermark potential for generative AI?
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that also came to mind, Laurie, because we were talking about it, and how it's maybe easier to watermark images, by sort of using the pixel side of things. But then in terms of watermarking text content could also be done in something that's currently being looked at, is my understanding, because I think the biggest challenge for academia is the assessment side of things, exactly what you're talking about, and makes our life as academics much harder. So what are your thoughts around the kind of watermarking and assessment side of things, and kind of solving that real issue to make sure that we produce students that are using this generative AI as a positive tool and not abusing it and affecting their future effectively when they go into the workforce upon graduating with us?
So to be very frank, I've not thought of this concept of how watermarking can be done for generative AI. I know that watermarking is done in images and sometimes it need not be visible. So when we talk of watermarking, most of the time we consider watermarking what is visible. But there are mechanisms in which watermarking is not also visible. And in generative AI generated content, forgetting ChatGPT, if you look at Grammarly, Grammarly is also generative AI, right? When it is correcting our sentences, it is correcting errors in a grammar. That's also generative AI. But now, if you look at the way that it generates that rules, there is certain kind of traces that it leaves behind. And so there are AI which also detects the amount of generation of language that happens. Whether I would call it watermark or not, I really don't know. But today, if there is a manuscript which is submitted in Turnitin, Turnitin provides that to what extent there has been generation in that manuscript. But the challenge in that is language correction, whether it takes care of language correction, which has been used using Grammarly, I'm not really sure. So using Grammarly, it is possible to expand a paragraph or make it more shorter, but that itself is generated content, completely generated content. Now, whether we have a mechanism to capture that and differentiate between what is content generation by asking a question versus what is content augmentation, or what we talk of a skill augmentation, whether it's content augmentation by making it shorter and crisper or correcting the grammar problems in the content, we really don't know whether AI has a mechanism to differentiate between these two. So I think watermarking is inherently there because it leaves those traces based on which we are able to detect that it is, yes, it is created content. And of course, in a large way, I think that's where blockchain is going to play a role, that we would have NFTs. So if it is content that is created from other generated content, extensions of content, so NFTs should be a mechanism through which we are able to, kind of trace that. Traceability might be enabled, empowered using NFTs, but how that is going to be done, I'm not sure of the technological innovations that has happened in this space right now.
Okay, thank you, Arpan. Really appreciate that.
Thank you. I mean, last one, I know we are almost reaching to time, but last question. I mean, we all are doing research, right? Engaged in publishing. And this definitely going to have a significant impact. So what do you see? How do you see this impacting our research and publication process?
So there was a point of time I was trying to develop a manuscript, like when that manuscript came from the nursing discipline, which was generated by ChatGPT. I also started developing a paper on metaverse, which was completely developed based on, ChatGPT queries. And in that time, GPT was not restricted to certain kinds of documents. GPT was more open. Now, after that acquisition and all, it has been more restrictive in terms of how it responds. But in those days, it was more open. So I was asking it questions like, what are the potential applications of blockchain in metaverse? What is the potential applications of a particular technology like, NFTs in metaverse and so on? So I found the responses were really, really great feeders. Now, what is going to happen is, if somebody is undertaking a literature review, I think if that person knows how to learn, he can use GPT to learn what is the direction he should be looking at. So when earlier we were thrown into an ocean to find a direction, I think finding that initial direction would become much easier with a platform like GPT, where a student just needs to raise initial queries surrounding an area, and he gets a summarized view of that area, which might not be right, which might not be correct. Interpretations might be biased, interpretation might be faulty, but still he knows that this is the area and these are the keywords with which he should start searching the literature. So I think that shortening of the cycle might happen if somebody's using it appropriately to do an initial search of the literature. But where my apprehensions lie is basically that for a young mind, there might not be possible boundaries of fair usage. So he or she might be involved into generating content in a rate that actually flows into his research papers and actually into his actual work. Now, for us as supervisors, how do we distinguish that this is generated, ideas versus this is an original idea? That might become difficult over a period of time, because even if we are experts in an area, our expertise is based on limited reading that we do. We are, limited by the readings that we do, and generative AI is not really restricted in terms of the knowledge that flows into it based on globally accessible documents. So I feel that we maybe as supervisors might be challenged in terms of evaluating whether a student has used it for skill augmentation versus whether he has actually used it for developing models and actually developing papers. Sometimes, if he has done the writing himself, even the tools might not be able to decipher the differences. So I think literature reviews are going to be easier now in terms of giving ideas and giving directions, but original thinking is somewhere, if students don't venture into, that's going to reduce their cognitive skills in the long run to ask serious questions and ideate about serious outcomes.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think there are other aspects that might also be, certainly literature review aspect is the most important thing that would be impacted. But as you said that anyone can obviously, with good prompt, can ask for research design, can ask for data collection, can ask for, of course, it wouldn't collect the data, but they provide the responses that can help you to in fact, people are already using it to generate measurements, for example, and those kind of things. So it's already been, I mean, people already experimenting with AI use, particularly ChatGPT using for research purposes. So I think that the impact will be quite wide, but we'll see where we go. By the end, if I ask you, Arpan, tell 3 positive and 3 negatives of the generative AI, particularly ChatGPT. If you think that what those 3 things are the most important thing in terms of having positive impact, and 3 most important negative impact.
Okay. So in terms of positive impact, I feel that productivity of individuals who are creating content, that is going to go up significantly. So you would be having content creators who would start using AI for improving the quality and the presentation of the content. So in fact, if you look at how influencers have started using AI for improving the video, generating content for videos, I think that has increased and that will increase quite significantly. Other positive benefit, the second positive benefit, if I look at how generative AI, would be useful in organization, would be in the space of, coding. So coding and integration, system integration in the IT industry, I sense that there is going to be huge number of efficiencies, huge amount of efficiency that will flow into that process. Because if you look at most of the major projects which run in the IT industries, most of them are system integration projects, and that's where moving from a low code to no code environment will gradually happen. And system integration would gradually move into system configuration as an area. Instead of coding, instead of importing data, coding, making apps, interfaces, it will move towards how you can configure systems based on the models, existing models that are there. And that has already started with applications as a service kind of ecosystem coming in popularly in cloud computing paradigm. The third thing I foresee is with generative AI coming in is probably in the space of entertainment. When we talk of OTP platforms, if you look at how ecosystem evolved, there was a point of time when human mind would enjoy reading books. Now, very few people have this natural inclination to spend 20 days, 30 days reading a book. And that book getting shortened into blogs, which used to be 2,000 words. And that 2,000 words have now get restricted to, what we today call shorts, which is basically a graphical description of an event within, probably 50 words or 30 words. So I saw that evolution happening in content. The same evolution is happening in entertainment also. So there used to be a time when a 3-hour movie used to be very exciting. When the sitcom started coming in, people started having a sitcom series where probably a half-an-hour sitcom is all that you have, motivation and, energy for. And you would be having people looking for shorter and shorter medium to basically look for sources of information. So now sources of information has come to, in Instagram, where each, content is just for 30 seconds or 1 minute. And that is where I see that generative AI is going to have a lot more possibilities to create content, which will be, kind of having engagement in the long run or in the short run. And probably we will see a disruption also, but probably a huge impact in how entertainment content is getting created using generative AI. So those would be the three positive things that I'm sensing right now. I don't know about, of course, there is a lot more debate surrounding AI as an augmentation, AI to replace jobs. So in terms of negative things, I think AI is going to do away with a lot more job, descriptions that we have right now. So a lot more jobs which are more repetitive. Generative AI is going to escalate the speed at which they are going to get replaced. That is one major area surrounding future of work, future of jobs. The debate is going to become stronger. There'll be more concerns surrounding how efficiencies in existing job roles will reduce the requirement and dependencies on many others. That is one change that I'm envisioning. The other side is surrounding the veracity of content, the veracity of information that we are creating online. So the impact of that information diffusion has multiple elements into it. So if the information is diffusing and if it is misinformation, it can have many adverse impacts on the society. Adverse impacts could be in terms of even polarizing societal preferences, whether it is political preferences, whether that is consumer behavior related to product preferences, which is good for them, which is not good for them. I sense that generative AI is going to make it difficult for people to trust information sources on one side, and also have impacts in terms of polarizing their preferences in the long run. So that is one of the adverse impacts in the societal level that I see. Then that misinformation related impacts would not only be there in societal level, but also in organizational context. But in organization, because people who are working in the organization would have better understanding about, how business rules have evolved over a period of time. So maybe in organization, the challenge of veracity is going to be less immediate, because people will have different levels of trust based on generative content versus original content. So there will be better trust sources for the sources of information. The third thing would be like when firms start adopting these, generative AI in large, like what happened for the laptop manufacturer, if it happens for very critical industries, what kind of, security and information risk concerns might be there, especially if we foresee that these changes are going to happen in, say, in cyber physical systems, which are very critical, like critical information infrastructure, critical infrastructure, those kind of areas. So what would it mean for the nation? What would it mean for policy perspective to govern these usage? I don't think we have any readiness, we have any literature surrounding these in current times. So I see that that is an area of concern, that if generative AI is creating and diffusing into organization, then especially for critical information infrastructure or critical infrastructure per se and cyber physical systems, what's going to be the implications in those areas? So I would think that these are some of the areas where a concern would be there.
Right. And just, obviously all those are, definitely very relevant points. And what I see here, like, we historically, all agriculture was organic. And then we moved to the, commercial agriculture, where people started using chemicals and fertilizers and everything. Now, we sell organic more expensive than the normal agriculture. So what I see that, where we are going, everything will be obviously influenced by ChatGPT type of content. So those content will be everywhere, right? But then perhaps companies, there will be a specialized company which will be creating content just based on human input. And those content or those services or those products would be perhaps more expensive than the one that is generated or created through these tools because of the misinformation, disinformation, loss of lack of trust and lack of, loss of those things. So I think the human input and human-based output perhaps would be more premium than the ChatGPT or generative AI based ones. That's how I'm seeing how things going to go. Laurie and Edwin, any thoughts?
No, nothing to add. I think that's a valid vision of how things will progress. But no, thank you very much, Arpan. That was very insightful. Again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. It was lovely discussing all these things with you. Great to have you here.
Edwin, any final thoughts?
I mean, I do like your summary there, Yogesh, of the kind of organic, non-organic approach to maybe generative AI and its use. And I think, yeah, there's probably something in that depending on the industry. It'd be interesting to see, maybe there'll be some sort of watermark or kite mark rather when it comes to the output of a product or a service based on that, Yogesh.
Thank you. So Arpan, we really enjoyed this conversation, and I very much hope those who may listen to this, they also find this valuable. Ultimately, this is, one of the last generation of human outputs, human-based outputs. Yeah, we're not using any generative AI. It's original, organic. So thank you so much for giving your time, Arpan, and valuable thoughts and insights. And hopefully we will continue with this conversation going forward. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Edwin. And let me just